How's Patty about Cincinnati? What a team, what a team, what a team. Each man and a lady from 1 to 80. How they scream, how they scream, how they scream.
Hey, Reds fans, this is Jack Greiner, along with my friend Randy Freaking. We're here for the first episode of We Love Our Team. It's a new podcast devoted to the Cincinnati Reds, and we're going to try to answer the existential question of why so many people love the Reds, or as the song goes, why are so many people batty about Cincinnati? Our podcast will feature Reds fans from far and wide. Our guests will include authors who've written books about the Reds, celebrities who are longtime Reds fans, a Twitter account holder whose Twitter handle was @TitanicStruggle in honor of Marty Brennaman, sportscasters, former Reds players, Rosie Reds members, and other notable figures, and extraordinary Reds fans. For our first episode, we decided to interview ourselves to give you a taste of episodes to come. So sit back, and we hope you enjoy this inaugural episode of We Love the Reds. Now, Randy and I have met after law school when we worked at the same firm. I'm a First Amendment lawyer. I represent media companies locally and nationally and regionally and help them with First Amendment issues. Randy, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, Jack, I was a lawyer as well. I'm now retired. I practiced for 38 years, and I wrote a book about opening day history, and I wrote about a book about Marty Brennaman, along with a co-author, Mike Ziliox. And I'm a longtime Reds fan since I was born in 1957.
All right. Collaborating on a new book this time, right?
We are collaborating on a new book with my nephew, Grant Freaking, but it's still a work in progress.
All right. Good enough. Well, enough of that, Randy. Thanks for joining. Let's talk about how your Reds fandom got started. Take me back to the beginning.
Well, the beginning is probably when I was playing knot-hole baseball. You know, I think back in those days, Jack, we started when we were 6 or 7 or 8 years old, unlike today when they start about 2. And, you know, my dad started taking me to Reds games. We used to go to Twilight doubleheaders, you know, just walking in the Crosley field, you know, after playing on Little League fields. And then you walk in the Crosley fields and you see the green grass and the cutout for the infield. And you hear the concessionaires barking out peanuts and hot dogs and beers, you know, just quite a thing. And it just captures you. If you're a little kid playing baseball and you walk into a big league stadium, you're hooked.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
How about
hard.
you?
It's a similar thing, you know, started playing when I was probably 6. You know, you talk about it's different today than it was. We didn't have things like coaches pitch back then. We just had, you know, what inevitably seemed like the biggest kid would be the pitcher, and you'd kind of get up there and shake a little bit because obviously control wasn't in their repertoire typically. But Willie Putz was a pitcher that I remember, and he just scared the bejesus out of me. He just would take one extra step off the mound. Nobody ever called him for a balk, and he would bring it pretty hard. And, you know, we would just kind of hope for the best. But, yeah, Crosley Field was a great experience. It was in a kind of an industrial neighborhood. And certainly we saw it, you and I, in its latter years. But you kind of get there and park wherever and then walk in, and it was just this beautiful. Once you walk through the gates, it really did feel like Field of Dreams to a certain extent. So I was trying to think about my first game, and I can't honestly say that I remember my first game. I do remember as a kid, one of my first games, Pete Rose hit a home run. I do remember that, and I think it was a Tressler Comet bat giveaway. So I do have some recollections from that first game. I don't know if you remember yours or not.
You know, I don't, but I think it's probably the same because my Uncle Harold used to take me to the bat days. And what I remember from the bat days, you know, we'd all be dressed up in our Little League uniforms, and they would literally give you a wooden bat.
Yeah.
And so some point during the game, all the kids would be banging these wooden bats on the concrete floors. It was pretty crazy, you know, but it was a lot of fun.
I doubt that. Yeah, I think like we think about today, the idea of weaponizing 20,000 kids with a deadly object. Maybe in retrospect, wasn't that smart, but it seemed to work out pretty well. And obviously, the marketing worked because I still remember it was Tressler Comet, and Tressler Comet is long gone, but I remember that. I remember that very fondly.
Well,
Uh,
I remember the advertising sign out on Crosley Field for Marathon Oil,
oh,
and
sure.
if a Reds player hit that sign, they got 55 gallons of gas.
Yep. The gas car probably cost about 10 cents a gallon back then, but a giveaway is a giveaway. I mean, what the
Yeah,
heck, you know?
that's right.
Deal. It's a good deal. Uh, yeah, it just we seem so close to the players, and I think even players came through a tunnel. I think the visiting players went right through the grandstand. I mean, so if you were sitting there, you could get really up close and personal with the players. It was pretty awesome.
Well,
So
they had the sun deck out in right field. I think the tickets were $1,
yeah, right,
and so
right.
we would occasionally sit out in the sun deck. It might have been a quarter for all I know.
It may have, yeah. I mean, it may have been, but you were going to your twilight doubleheaders, so you were getting buy one get one. So you know,
Absolutely.
you were taking advantage of the system even back then. Uh, who was your favorite player growing up, Randy?
My favorite player growing up was Pete Rose, just because he was Charlie Hustle. Mickey Mantle called him Charlie Hustle when he ran the first base after a walk in spring training. So that kind of intrigued me, and I tried to hustle when I was a little league ball player. But Jack, over the years, I was thinking about this. I think it's kind of changed. Pete was my favorite player, and I was outraged, when they didn't reinstate him to baseball. But I've thought about it a little bit more, and I think my favorite player since then was Junior Griffey. And the reason I say that is because when I would watch games, I don't think I would ever go far enough away from the TV to miss one of his at bats.
Yeah,
And I think that's a kind of a telltale of who your favorite player is. Like even last, in 2023 when Ellie was up the bat and it was on TV, I tried not to miss one of his at bats. So I
right.
guess he was my favorite player,
Yeah,
or just the most exciting. So much disappointment when he struck out, but then he did all those exciting things. Whereas another player wasn't as likely to give you so much disappointment or so much joy.
yeah. You get the roller coaster with a guy like Ellie, that's for sure. And you truly don't know what you're going to get from at bat to at bat. Do you remember Junior's first game as a Red?
I do. Opening day,
What
I
year?
want to say
2000, I think.
2000, I think it was,
Yeah.
before they built the Great American Ballpark.
Yeah. I was there. I was sitting out in the outfield, and I probably the green seats, as I recall, maybe all the way up in the red. But I just remember him running out, to get to center field, and he just was drinking it in. I mean, it was a very awesome moment. I mean, it just was so amazing that he was back. And obviously our hopes were high, and he had a great year that first year. I think people forget they tend to think that the Griffey years in Cincinnati were somewhat disappointing, but his first year he raked and was just was fun to watch, and just defensively what he could still do, and it was pretty great. I mean, in retrospect, should they have given up what they gave up to get him? I don't know. That's another
Yeah.
interesting conversation. But for that moment, I can't imagine trading that moment for much of anything. It was just that awesome. Were you there when Pete came back?
Oh, absolutely, Jack. I think when Pete came back in 1985, I think that is the top sports event in Cincinnati sports history, at least for one play. You know, when he hit I think it was a line drive to center field, and it got through the center fielder's legs, rolled to the wall, and Pete went head first in the third. And that place was absolutely rocking. I do think that's when I talk to my friends and I say, okay, what's the top play in Cincinnati sports history? They usually point to that play.
I think, if I remember correctly, we were working together back then, and I think I was on vacation, and I heard the news, and I told my wife that I got to call Randy. I just got to call Randy and make sure he's heard this. And I think I did. And my recollection is you literally were choked up. I mean, you were just, and that was before the triple, but that was, you know, when the Reds made the announcement that they made the trade and Pete was coming home. You know, it was, I do. I said, I got to call Randy and I've got to let him know this. So, and I think you already,
and your client put on the front page, I mean, in big bold letters, Pete comes home.
yeah, exactly.
It's unbelievable. How about your favorite player, Jack, growing up?
You know, I think my favorite player was Tony Perez. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I really like Bench. I like Rose. I mean, you know, but I think my favorite player was Perez. There was just something about he just seemed to be such a joyful guy. You know, he seemed to be a clutch hitter. You know, people will say, well, they debate whether there's any such thing as, you know, a clutch hitter, but boy, it sure seemed like when they needed a hit or an RBI, he seemed to come through for them. I always loved him on the start of the game with Joe Duxall. Those neither one of them really spoke English very well, but you know, it was fun.
I think Tony was famous for saying, "See the ball, heat the ball."
See the ball, heat the ball, and you know, Joe would just kind of go with the flow. Tony had the kind of the deep voice. Concepcion had the more of the higher pitch voice. But I had a chance to meet Tony one time. My wife was involved. Kathy was involved with the Multiple Sclerosis Society, and they used to have a book reading promotion where the kids would read books, and they called it the Readathon. And I think they would donate or get donations for every book they read, and then they'd have a banquet at the end. And this one year, she managed to arrange for Tony to be there. And this was, he might have been a coach by that point. It might have been right at the tail end of his playing career, but mid '80s. And I just gave this glowing introduction that she asked me to write and present. I was so excited. And I mean, someday I hope somebody writes about me like I wrote about Tony. And I just, you know, I gave it. And then he spoke. And then it came time for us to meet. And Kathy was very pregnant at the time with our third son, or our third child, Ben. And, you know, visibly very pregnant. And we're shaking. I finally get to shake hands with, you know, my hero. And he says, "You want the boy?" And I didn't know what he was saying. I was like, "I'm sorry, Miss Perez, I didn't understand it." And what he was asking me if I wanted a boy, which, you know, I was like, well, as long as it's healthy. But it was just great. It was great to meet him, and he couldn't have been a nicer guy. And he was very good to show up that day and put up with my foolishness.
Well, you know, Jack, we've told the studio audience to be quiet during this episode, but let's see what they think about Tony Perez. Oh, Tony might be calling in here, Jack. I don't know. My phone was on. I don't think that's Tony calling in, but anyway, let's continue. How about your favorite player? How about your favorite player these days?
You know, that's a great question. There's so many good young players on the Reds right now. but towards the end of the season last year, I really got to like Novelle Marte, who's projected to be probably the third baseman. I like his swing. I like the way he fields his position, and and that's taking nothing away from Ellie or Matt McLean or Will Benson or Jake Fraley or Friedel. I mean, I just you go around the horn, and I think this is an exciting time to be a Reds fan. I think there is, the collection of young talent is as good as it's been in a long time, and hopefully they've got to prove it, but we'll see. How about you out of that group?
It's probably Matt McLean. I
Yeah.
just admire his work ethic, and I think he's got a lot of upside potential. He's not going to give you the excitement maybe that Ellie does, but I think he's going to be a great player in the future.
Saw him last year in a game on a Friday night when he hit a grand slam and the Reds won, and it was great. I hope he stays healthy. I know he's going to be out for a little bit with tweaking his oblique, but hopefully he'll come back and be better. When you were growing up, Randy, we talked a little bit about moments like uh, Pete Rose coming back, Junior coming back. Any other moments that stand out in your memory of games that you attended, whether that was on field or off field?
Yeah, there's so many, Jack, but I would say the thing I remember the most is Hank Aaron coming to Cincinnati in 1974. He was one home run away from Babe Ruth, and remember the Braves threatened to hold him out of the games in Cincinnati the first weekend, and the commissioner actually stepped in and ordered the Braves to play Henry Aaron.
Yeah.
And so I was at the game with my mom and dad. They wrote a excuse from school saying I had to go to the dentist that afternoon,
It was opening
which
day,
was
right? It was opening day.
kind of a tradition. And so I ran over to left field before the first inning, and I went down the aisle in the green seats, sat about the third step there, and I look over. It's the assistant principal from my high school, and he says, "Randy, I thought I was a dentist appointment." I said, "Well, Mr. Cluse, I got clean teeth, no cavities this time." And within about 3 minutes, Hank Aaron comes up and launches a ball in the left field for a home run. It
Yeah.
did not reach the seats. It got over the wall, and I believe a police officer retrieved the ball.
Wow.
But that was just a magical moment. The president was there, I believe. Oh,
Yeah.
no, maybe it was Vice President Ford.
Okay.
But, that's just a historical moment. And he didn't hit another home run in Cincinnati. I don't know how much he played that weekend, but then he broke the record in Atlanta.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are a lot of funerals and dental appointments on opening day, I think, that are pressing that people have to go to. I was not at that. I remember watching it, catching it on TV. I for sure remember the home run that set the record against Al Downing down in Atlanta, and the two guys ran on the field, the two fans and two idiots that chased him around. I think one of my really magical moments for me was one of many in 1970. I get in trouble at home sometimes when I say 1970 was the best year of my life, but I think listeners to this podcast would agree. I went to opening day, the last game at Crosley Field, the first game at Riverfront, the All-Star game, and game one of the World Series. So that was a pretty amazing year. And just, we didn't have season tickets or anything, but my dad just somehow that year just managed to come through at different times and managed somehow to find a way to get us to those games. But we almost missed Pete Rose's slide into Ray Fosse in the 1970 All-Star game. The National League was down, I believe, 5-2 in the eighth inning, And my dad and I, when we would go to games, would go over to the Western Hills Plaza, get on a bus, take it right up to the plaza level of Riverfront, and not have to pay for parking or any of that stuff. So it was late in the it was eighth inning. Looks like National League's going to lose. My dad, we're up in the red seats. My dad says, "Hey, come on, we'll get on one of the early buses. We'll beat the crowd." So I don't know how much of a fight I put up, but we started working our way down. We got one level down from the red seats. We were at the yellow seat level. We heard we heard a big cheer. We went in and saw that Dick Dietz, who was a catcher for the Giants, had hit a 3-run home run to tie the game. There were a couple empty yellow seats, which we discovered that night were padded. They were the club level seats. That was for the high rollers, but we found 2 empty ones, and I guess the ushers were not. The ushers at Riverfront used to be really tough, man. If you had a red seat ticket and tried to get down to the blue or the green, you were really facing a hurdle. But for some reason, I guess by that point, by the 8th inning, I guess the ushers had decided to call off the dogs a little bit. So we managed to get down, and we saw Pete, make the play and score the winning run, and it was awesome. But I really was that close to having missed that, which I would have, which would have really broken my heart.
So you stayed in the yellow seats for the remainder of the game.
Stayed in the yellow seats. The other
thankfully those two empty seats were probably 2 guys that left early, like you were planning to do.
They were sitting on the bus. They had our seats on the bus.
They're on the bus going back to Western Hills.
I'll tell you the other funny one. Speaking of near misses, but Game 6 of the 1990 National League playoffs, Reds and Pirates, and a guy that I knew called me up and said, "I've got 4 tickets. They're not together. They're 2 and 2, but they're in the blue seats." And for younger listeners of our podcast, Riverfront Stadium had levels that were designated by the seat color. So we should probably explain that the blue seats were field level, like right around the field. Above the blue were the green seats. Above the green were a small amount of yellow seats, and then the cheap seats were the red seats. And again, it was a round stadium, so seats were all around the park. So you could be sitting way up high in the red, but you might be in center field under the scoreboard, or you might be behind home plate. In any event, Game 6 of the 1990 playoffs, I get a call from a guy. He says he's got 2 sets of blue seats and I can have them. And I'm like, sure, it's great. My father-in-law, my dad wasn't able to go, but my father-in-law was a huge sports fan, Reds fan, Bengals fan, it didn't matter. Loved to go. So I call him, and he says, it was kind of a rainy night. It wasn't that nice of a night. And he says, "Nah, I think I'll pass," which just astounded me. I mean, I could not believe that he said no. So we called a couple other people, and this guy with the tickets called me like literally close to game time. So we couldn't find anybody. So we were going to just sell the tickets when we got down there, sell the 2. We were going to use the other 2. And
wait, Jack, wasn't scalping tickets illegal back in those days?
We would have sold them for face value, Randy, I assure you.
Oh, I'm sure.
But I was working. My office was in the Fifth Third Center on Fountain Square at the time, and we pulled in and we parked. And I said to Kathy, I said, "I just can't believe you're dead. I cannot believe it." So we went to a payphone, and I called him, and I said, "Are you sure you don't want to go to this game?" He goes, "Oh my God, I am so glad you called me. I've been kicking myself ever since." So he came down. We left him at will call. So we were able to go. The Reds clinched. And Kathy and I were on national TV. These seats so happened to be in the blue section. They were in Marge Schott's section of the blue seats. We were in the last row. And about the sixth inning, I turn around and standing behind me is James Brown from CBS Sports with a microphone. And I said, Kelly, we're gonna be on TV. You know, they're doing a live remote. He didn't interview us or anything. He just kind of did his thing from the stands. But I got calls the next day from people in Dallas, New York. It was hilarious. So we really were. We were just full frontal on CBS. But that's those are the two misses. So fortunately for me, we saw Pete. Fortunately for my father-in-law, he got to see the clincher, which was a great game. That was a great series. The
That was
1990.
a great series. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, so how about your favorite teams? I mean, like, think about a season, think about a team. Was there one that stands out for you?
My favorite team outside of the Reds for many years was the Pittsburgh Pirates, believe it or not, when I was growing up because of Roberto Clemente.
All right.
And you think about it, Jack, all we could do was read about him.
Yeah.
We had, I think NBC had a game of the week back in the 60s on Saturday afternoon. And Mel Allen had a highlight show before the game of the week.
Right.
And that's the only time you could actually see those guys.
Right.
You'd have to just read the paper and read about how great Roberto Clemente was. So I was a little partial to the Pirates, even though we later became fierce competitors. They were good in the late 60s, early 70s,
Yeah.
and really throughout the 70s.
Well, 70, 72, 75, the Reds played them in the NLCS and fortunately won every time. But yeah, and I guess Clemente's last game was at Riverfront, right?
I think his last game, I don't want to correct you, Jack, but I think his last game was at Crosley Field.
No, Randy. It was
He was at Riverfront?
I think it was at Riverfront. I think it was the 72 National League Championship Series, which the Reds, that was the Johnny Bench home run.
Yes.
And then the wild pitch from Bob Moose. And then I think that New Year's, that December 31st is when the plane crash happened. Cause I just remember, it feeling just terrible. I mean, I didn't have an affiliation with him like you did, but you had to admire what a great player he was and how sad it was for him to, go down in a plane like that, which was.
Yeah, he was going on a humanitarian mission and the plane went down. It was just shocking. And we lost one of the great right fielders of all time.
No doubt. No doubt. So speaking of other teams, have you been to other parks? Have you seen the Reds play in other parks?
Yeah, I've seen the Reds play it. And I've seen the Reds most often in Wrigley Field. We used to go there in college and maybe in law school. And after that, I'd go up there with a few buddies and go to Wrigley. But, the park I really like is San Francisco.
Yeah.
Not Candlestick. I could never go to Candlestick because they built a new ballpark. And I think it's now called Oracle Field.
Right.
But it's gone through a bunch of name changes, but it's just beautiful. It's out on the bay. And, we've seen those shots of Barry Bonds hitting balls out into the bay. I think he holds the record for hitting balls out into the bay. But it's just a great setting. It's got that big glove on the left field wall, and there's a car out there or something. And, you're away from downtown to an extent, but you're right along the wharf there, Fisherman's Wharf and all that. You just walk down to the park, and fantastic place.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been to probably half a dozen and seen the Reds play. I've been to several games in Cleveland at now Progressive Field when it was Jacobs Field. Went to good friend of mine works in the Indians organization, and so he had us up for a game. I remember this. Speaking of Griffey, in 2000, and we went up for the whole series. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. The Reds lost on Friday. They lost on Saturday. They start the game on Sunday. They go down by like 5 runs in the first inning. they managed to kind of keep it close, and they're down by 3 in the seventh inning or whatever.
This sounds
Griffey,
like the All-Star game. You weren't
we weren't
trying
getting
to
ready to
cut
leave.
out
We were not
early.
getting ready to leave. We're not getting ready to leave. But Griffey
He was
comes up. Griffey comes up his first year back, and the Indians have used all of their left-handed relievers. They don't have a left-hander to put up there against Griffey, so they either leave in the guy who was in there or bring in a right-hander. Griffey hits a 3-run home run, ties it. The Reds go on to win in extra innings. Just like crazy. The Reds survived a bases loaded, nobody out situation. It was just nuts. And my sons were fairly young still at the time, and they asked on the way up to the game if it'd be okay to root for the Reds since we were the guest of this guy who's in the organization. And he was a law school friend of mine, and there was no way I was going to tell my kids they can't root for the Reds. So I said, of course you can root for the Reds, just yeah. so they're sitting. We had 2 rows of seats. We had 4 and 4, and the Reds win the game. And my kids are like poking my friend in the back, like ha ha ha, just go Reds, go Reds. So later that year, the Indians, now the Guardians, but the Indians missed the playoffs by 1 game. And I called my friend and I said, "How you doing?" He goes, "Oh, how am I doing? How am I doing, Jack?" He says, the only thing I can think about is we missed by 1 game and we blew a 5-run lead and your kid's poking me in the back. Yeah, so I'm doing just great. Thanks for calling. So that was fun. We had a good time. I think the most fun I've had at a visiting park was Milwaukee. People just great. We were there in I think 2011 or 2013, I think. The Reds were still, that was the year the Reds made the wild card. And the game we were at, Votto gets up in the first inning, hits a home run, and we're just jumping up and down and going crazy and trying not to be, I've always told my kids, look, it's okay to root for your team. Don't be totally obnoxious in a visiting park, root, cheer, but don't overdo it. So I don't think we did, but this guy behind us said, "Oh, that's great. Way to go." He goes, I don't know if you're aware of the tradition up here at Miller Park, but if your guy hits a home run, you got to buy beers for all the people behind you. I did not do that, but it was.
It's not like going to a football game where
Right.
sometimes you'll run into nasty fans in the opposing park or the Steeler fans that come down to Cincinnati,
Right.
and there can be fights and all sorts of things. I've always had a good experience going to opposing. No one game in baseball means
That's
that
exactly
much.
right. That's exactly
unless it's the 7th game of the World Series.
Right.
And so they're usually pretty hospitable. Even when people come in from out of town and I notice they're there, I like to welcome them to the town. How do you like Cincinnati? Where are you staying?
Exactly.
Have any questions? Things like that.
No, I think that's right. And that's the experience we've had at all the ones that we've gone to. And we're trying to make a point. I would love, my bucket list is to get to all of them. I still have a ways to go, but we've done a pretty good put a pretty good dent in the Central Division of both the American and the National League. So we went this summer. Our trip was to Detroit, which we had a great time. My God, that is a beautiful ballpark. It's about 24 years old now, but it looks just fantastic. And again, sat in the bleachers on purpose. We wanted to be out there and almost got a home run from Friedel. He put it just a little bit out of our reach, but we just had a great time. Randy, we are we're kind of coming up on time here. We've had a great conversation. I've certainly enjoyed it. The last question, of course, is what would you give for a Reds World Championship at this point?
Jack, I would give darn near anything except for a member of my family.
Okay.
So you name the price, I would probably give it, as long as it's not too exorbitant. I would certainly pay a lot of money to see the Reds in the World Series in a Game 7 with the hope maybe if the face value is 200, I might pay, 225 for that ticket. Who knows?
Good luck with that. Good luck with
Yeah.
that. But I'm with you. I think no family members get sacrificed for it, but everything else is pretty negotiable. It would be nice. I'd love to see it for my kids. We had, you and I, Randy, we took it for granted maybe to a certain extent in the 70s. The Reds were just seemingly always in the NLCS, in the World Series, however many times, 3 times, 4 times in the 70s in the World Series. And, and shame on us if we took it for granted. But I think my kids, and now my grandkids, I hope they see it. I'm sure they will. It seems like the law of averages suggests that they should, but it's hard. You never know. How long has it been for Cleveland?
Yeah, we've gotten spoiled. We were spoiled, no doubt.
Yeah.
But then again, I remind people, there's 30 teams. So an average team should make the World Series once every, 15 years, since there's 15 teams in the National League. So once every 15 years. And the Reds have been in the World Series, the championship series more often, obviously, but the World Series 5. So 5 in 150 years is 1 out of 150 that they've won. And that's exactly the law of averages.
Yeah. So maybe this year. Maybe this year. There's always this year or next year. So there's always hope. Well, Randy, this was great. I'm going to enjoy doing this podcast. I'm really looking forward to it. It'll be fun. So onward and upward, and we'll start having real celebrity guests here. The next podcast, we'll kick it off.
Absolutely. We got a number of good guests coming up. We got Greg Rose, John Arardi along the way, my friend Mike Ziliox, who wrote the book about Marty Brenneman. We've got Kirk Herbstreit, of all people, coming on the podcast. We got Betsy Ross. It's a literal who's who. Jack will finally have people on there that other people know.
That's right. A real cornucopia of famous Reds fans. So that's our plan, and we're looking forward to it. So thanks, everybody.